Hi everyone, I'm Sora, one of the translators of Kim Bo-young's short story collection on the origin of species. I'll be reading from the story entitled On the Origin of Species and What Might Have Happened Thereafter. I chose this particular story to read from both because it's one of the title stories and because it's unique in the collection for being a hybrid of science fiction and horror, which is also probably my favorite genre combo. If I were to compare it to other works, I would say that it's something like Isaac Asimov's I, Robot meets Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I was fascinated by the concept of the story, the ideas that the writer put forth, at the same time that I felt a kind of revulsion while translating certain parts of the story. But it was a revulsion that you expect from horror. You want the reader to feel unsettled and challenged by what they're reading, and the story certainly did that for me. That said, for my own sake as well as yours, I won't be reading one of the more disturbing scenes, but rather one of my favorite moments in the whole collection. If you have a copy of the book, you can turn to page 272 to follow along. And I'll begin reading now. The room was full of small white bundles of protein, tiny robot-shaped proteins lying in little vessels arranged in neat rows. Each bundle was about the size of Kay's forearm, and each bundle was alive. Kay stood there, rapt, gazing at the creatures. They were appallingly beautiful. Their tiny developing fingers and toes wiggled, and their fledgling bodies squirmed for balance as if still unaccustomed to gravity. And yet they were perfect, as if made by the gods themselves. Kay didn't have to ask why Professor Straup wanted to show off this place. Clearly the assumption was that the one specimen Cecil had showed Kay hadn't been sufficient. Kay's brain continued to buzz with hundreds of demons shouting in chorus, "Run, run, run, run!" It was all Kay could do to stay upright. It was important to run away before losing control entirely. If not... "There's so many," Kay said, though dizziness made talking almost impossible. "Why did you make so many? Moving matter devours so many other organisms. How will you ever feed them all? What kind of research are you conducting?" "Research? What research?" It didn't sound as if Professor Straup was being ironic. "We just want to grow as many as possible," Professor Straup said. "You do have a point, though. We should be aware of our limits. And again, we can always hire more staff and expand the facility." "But why? What do you mean, why?" Professor Straup stared at Kay blankly. Everyone else in the room was eyeing Kay suspiciously as well. Just then, Kay flashed on the image of the abandoned library. Organic biology was moving backwards. Most of the literature and data had disappeared or been thrown out. The field existed now for one purpose and one purpose only. Everything that did not serve that purpose had been forgotten or disposed of. What remained was whatever was needed for their creation, their survival, their convenience. Everything else had lost all meaning. Precious records, the history of organic biology, the great robot race. They were worth less than a speck of dust compared to the importance of protecting and caring for these creatures. Kay's hand rose to the forehead. If only all sensory function would just quit right then and there. Kay's brain felt utterly overwhelmed, as if trying to cram in several gigabytes worth of hallucinations all at once. "What on earth are they?" Kay asked. "I don't know why you have to ask." Professor Straup spread out several long arms in a gesture meant to convey boundless esteem and gratitude. "You, our great leader, Kay Histian, gifted them to us before you left." At last, Kay remembered. An organism in the image of a robot. That had been Kay's final research project. For years, Kay had poured every ounce of energy into creating a living organism modeled after a 2000 series robot. When Kay left the lab, the project had still only been in the theoretical stages, but clearly it had succeeded since then. Drawing slow and steady breaths, feeding on other organisms, and chemically transforming the molecules and atoms around them to form their bodies, the proteins had indeed grown in the shape of a robot. I made that. To mock the gods and manifest our highest potential? To demonstrate our cunning intellect? To prove that robots can rule over life and the soul itself? Kay understood at last what had happened to all the robots who worked at the lab. They'd fallen in love.